I'm going to talk about IQ tests again in a moment, but I want to take a little sidestep at the moment to the underlying assumptions behind a bell curve, right? And the underlying assumptions behind that kind of distribution, that insistence in an assessment process that you put people over a bell curve is actually an insistence on inequality. In order for there to be some people who are geniuses, there must be some people that are idiots, but actually even more interestingly, there must be a lot of people who are so mediocre that we can just put them in the middle and let them do whatever they do. So, you know, what we've got to do is we insist on putting people across this kind of curve of inequality. Now, what's interesting as we come along later is that doesn't have to be the logic of assessment, and there are some forms of assessment which renounce that logic and don't use that logic at all. We're going to get to that. But I want to, with this little image here, which I sort of find amusing, I mean, this is how a lot of people experience tests. Whether it's an IQ test or any kind of test that operates across the bell curve, in other words, whether it's an ability test or whether it's an intelligence test across the bell curve, that process of insisting on inequality is part of a kind of a disciplinary system in the school, where the school is on this comparative thing where most people are either not very good or positively bad most of the time, and only a few are really good and can feel good about themselves. This actually fits perfectly against a society which also insists on inequality. And in a way, the school then becomes, or the assessment in the school becomes one of these things which kind of flogs you, which kind of, really beats you up along the way, sorts the brightest from all of the rest. And that's a kind of an invidious process. It's a difficult process. And a lot of us at school and in education systems have experienced assessment in these kinds of sensuous ways, even if not literally in the way that we see in this image. So I'm going to continue now with the story of the IQ tests. The next great player and the next interestingly influential player in the US scene was a man by the name of Robert Yerkes, who famously built the Army intelligence test. And again, what they tried to do was move away from language. You can see that, that the earlier tests, the Binet tests and the Goddard tests were very kind of language bound. And they thought, okay, if people don't have English as a first language, for example, and we want to find out their native intelligence and not have something which is language bound, let's have tests which just have visuals. So look at these visuals here, for example. And are there cultural assumptions built into visuals? Well, of course there are, just as much as there are into language. And here are some of the results of Yerkes' tests. So Yerkes used these tests as entry tests for people aspiring to join the US Army, okay? And surprise, surprise, that most European immigrants, which were people who were not English speakers, who were not familiar with the kind of school images that you might have found in the test, were classified in terms of their native intelligence as morons. And surprise, surprise, the darker peoples of Southern Europe were stupider than the fair peoples of Western and Northern Europe. Well, might that have had something to do with relative economic affluence of the countries they came from and the education systems? Maybe. Then the average Russian is this, and of course at the bottom of the pile for these tests was the American Negro. This is me, or quoting directly here from the work of Yerkes himself. A bit of holiday reading I'd really recommend to anybody who works in education. Just a marvellous book by Stephen Jay Gould, who's the great paleontologist, actually. He's out of his normal territory writing a book like this, although it does also include the business of measuring skulls, which is part of this mismeasure of man theme. But he looks at the whole history of intelligence tests and the way fundamentally the assumptions along the way were often simply racist assumptions or racist results based on the presupposition that test results were reflections of native intelligence. Now, I want to just conclude this section about intelligence test to say a couple of interesting things. They are still widely in use and widely useful for areas of disability. So, where people's capacities include mental capacity. Intelligence tests are still used, and in fact the original Binet tests and Goddard tests have been, new editions have been produced over the years, over and over again, and they're still useful where there are genuine issues of intellectual disability involved. So they're still used for that. But let me tell you another interesting thing which is kind of connected to that. They're the oldest tests, and they've actually remained very stable now for well over a century. So they've been kind of measuring roughly the same things for well over a century. And this, for me, is the ultimate kind of proof of the fact that they don't measure native intelligence at all. There's a New Zealand researcher of these things, whose name's Flynn, who discovered a thing called the Flynn effect. Because what he did in his research is he looked at IQ tests results from a century ago all the way through to today. And what's interesting is they're the same tests, but kids are getting smarter. Why are they getting smarter? They're at school more and longer. They're immersed in all kinds of new environments, which include, television and radio at first, and then there was more and more access to reading and books, and then there was, the internet now, and devices where kids are constantly stimulated by, the things that they swipe and things they can look through. Rarely have time to be bored. So in fact, kids are getting smarter, which kind of proves that we were never looking at native intelligence anyhow. We were looking at social and environmental conditions, which are also knowledge conditions.